Do you expect Russian military, Russian high command to support this idea of ceasefire in the air? Because it could also be beneficial for the Russian war machine to avoid another Ukrainian drone attacks deep inside Russia and deep inside Putin's war machine.
Well, there is no doubt that the Russians would be hoping that a reciprocal move by Ukraine would be to stop deep attacks into Russia. I think the Russian military high command and President Putin would like to see those attacks stopping. So it may be that offering a ceasefire in the air is a way of taking pressure off himself and taking pressure off the Russian people. But I think these are all ploys that are being played into a future negotiation. Of course, there are wider issues here that if Putin and Trump agree some kind of deal that President Zelensky is not able to agree to, there is a danger that the Americans will decide to withdraw their support from Ukraine. This will be a major challenge for European countries like mine to decide whether to continue to support Ukraine even without American assistance. And I think this is an issue that President Zelensky is currently talking with President Macron, Chancellor Merz, and Prime Minister Starmer, amongst others at the present moment, to see what the European position would be. Personally, I believe it would be right, and I'm sure that the United Kingdom and other European countries will go on supporting Ukraine, but it will be increasingly difficult to do so without active and significant American military support.
If there is a ceasefire deal in the air, do you expect US President Trump to put even more pressure on Vladimir Putin after the possible ceasefire in the air to achieve full unconditional ceasefire on the ground?
Yes, I think that a ceasefire in the air would be a first step towards a wider ceasefire. But of course, from a European security point of view, there is another aspect that's important, and that is that, of course, once the Russians stop their attacks on the ground and in the air, then it gives them a chance to refurbish their military, to resupply their ammunition depots, and if there is not a wider settlement in Europe, for them to consider testing the strength of NATO by pressing some form of attack, maybe against one of the Baltic states, to test NATO's resolve to stand by Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which is an attack on one member is an attack on all. So there are dangers for wider European security in there being a ceasefire in Ukraine, because it will provide an opportunity for the Russians to strengthen themselves to possibly press elsewhere. So there are many angles that have to be looked at here, not just the one from Ukraine, which of course from your people's point of view is the most important, and I fully understand that.
Also, let's cover sanctions against Russia. New sanctions against Russia should still be imposed this Friday, a White House official told Reuters. What is your assessment of this strategy of US President Donald Trump to negotiate with the Russians but still impose sanctions on Putin's war machine? And do you expect these sanctions to be imposed on Friday to be less harsh, less effective, rather than these sanctions which were discussed previously before negotiations in Moscow?
Well, Donald Trump likes to impose deadlines. We've seen that much more widely in his trade war and threat of tariff sanctions being applied to other countries. So far, it seems that Vladimir Putin is resistant to American timeline ultimatums. So I think the next 24 hours are going to be very interesting to see whether there is a realistic possibility of Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump not just talking on the telephone, but maybe meeting face to face and seeing if there are grounds for some form of ceasefire. If those potential talks collapse, then unless Donald Trump is going to very publicly walk back from his ultimatum, walk back from the red lines that he's imposed, then he will have no option but to impose further sanctions on Russia, and also further sanctions on countries like India, who he criticizes for buying Russian oil. And then, of course, there is also the issue of China. America is in a very tight negotiation with China on trade issues. America wants to have a reasonable relationship with China. But given that China is buying a lot of Russian oil, the question has to be, what will Trump's attitude be towards China buying Russian oil? This is another complicating factor. So none of these things are straightforward, and there are many interwoven threads that all come together, which make these potential negotiations really quite difficult, very difficult.